We're taking actions now to prevent that from happening. The actions that we have been employing and will continue to employ at the staff and council level is focusing on increasing our operating efficiencies to keep costs down, working hard on a daily basis to reduce personnel expenses, making sure that we're working to enhance our revenue base, and monitoring state budgets and protecting our revenues that flow through to the state to us, while at all times maintaining a fund balance or reserves at the targeted level to make sure we are well positioned for unforeseen financial changes. These are the things that are, I think as Commissioner Barnett would say, are in our DNA, and we remain focused, especially on expense control measures that you will see later when we go through some of the graphs. What we're suggesting as part of our priority action items for this version of the long-range plan is to really focus our attention on the revenue side, looking for opportunities to create new revenue sources and or enhance existing revenue sources that better match our current modern local economy, and revenues that would keep pace with general fund expenses. I think that will make more sense when you take a look at the graphs we have here on the whiteboard. This graph here shows the revenues and expenses in the general fund from 2012 through 2016. The revenues are in red and the expenses are in black. I'm going to focus here on the top two lines because these are our total revenues and expenses in the general fund. Some good news. Obviously, the red line is above the black line. Judy tells me this is a good thing. This means that our revenues are higher than expenses and have been not only for the 4-year period you see here, but going all the way back to 2009. So 6 or 7 years of sustainable and good performance where we are actually contributing to our fund balance or money in the bank. A closer look at these lines will reveal that on the expense side, in this 4-year period, expenses have increased from $41.3 million to about $45.5 million. That's an increase of just over 10%, or an average of 2.5% a year. Pretty good expense control. On the revenue side, what you'll see is while the revenues have not dipped below expenses, the rate of growth is substantially less, increasing at 5.5% over this 4-year period at an average of about 1.4% a year. Hence, you can see why we're saying the revenues are not keeping pace with expenses. We wanted to look a little further into our revenues and expenses to get a better handle on the trends and issues that we face. This next set of lines in the dashed colors here represent general fund revenues and expenses, but we have pulled out the public safety related pension costs, public safety pension revenues and expenses. We pulled them out of that line. Why? 3 reasons. Number 1, we are required to make pension contributions via state law. Number 2, the pension numbers show up equally on the revenue side as they do on the expense side. The revenue shows up as a property tax levy. The expenses show up as a contribution to the pension funds. And the third reason is it has been our practice at the Village of Downers Grove over the last several years to treat that as a complete pass-through. So to get a better handle on what's happening with the other revenues and expenses, we pulled that out of the equation. Here's some interesting findings. Again, good news, revenues have exceeded expenses in all 4 of those years. But now let's look at this expense line. And you'll see without the increased costs of public safety pensions, the expenses that are more in our direct control, we have expenses going up less than 6.5% over that period. That's just over 1.5% a year. We're very proud of our expense control measures that we all commit to from the council through the staff. So this is really excellent cost control. But now let's look at what's happening on the revenue side. You'll see that in 2016, the revenues in the general fund are about $40.2 million. That's only 1.5% higher than the revenues were in 2012. In fact, a closer look at this line reveals that in 3 of the last 4 years, these revenue sources have actually declined. Now, one footnote, in 2013, that was by design when we shifted and created the stormwater utility. We went from a property tax system with money running through the general fund to a fee-based system running through a stormwater fund. So a lot of that decline was by design as we made a shift. But certainly you can see that the revenues here not keeping pace with expenses, even though expenses are growing at only 1.6% a year. I want to take just a little bit of a deeper dive and show you some of the trends in a number format. What we have here is our top 10 revenue sources in the general fund, with our top going from top to bottom. The first thing to note is 4 revenues account for 2/3 of all the revenue in the general fund. Those are the top 4 being sales tax, the property tax levy for operations, utility taxes, and income taxes, sometimes referred to as LGDF, local government distributed fund. Any number you see here in red over this 4-year period is lower than the previous year. So you just look for spotting a red, and the one thing that you'll notice, in 2016, all 4 of our top 4 revenues were flat or declining. And we're concerned that this trend may continue, causing us to have a scenario where revenues will be actually less than expenses. On the sales tax side, we had 4 or 5 years of very strong growth. And then in 2016, it's starting to not perform as well as it did in 2015. Now there are 1 or 2 one-time adjustments that the state is flowing through, so it's not that we have $700,000 of actual decline there. There's some one-time adjustments. We're still trying to determine exactly how much of this decline is one-time adjustments to the state and how much of it is true sales tax revenue performance. But you can see the reason for concern. The other thing I'll highlight is something similar happening on the income tax. 4 years in a row of very strong growth, and then in 2016, a significant decline. The state has implemented a new accounting system, and they basically changed the formula for distribution of income tax as they've implemented that system. It's not a change in law, but it is a change in practice. We're still looking into this issue to understand if that is a temporary or permanent situation. We're working with the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference in the Illinois Municipal League to better understand this issue. So again, all 4 of our top 4 revenues flat or declining. So tonight in long-range planning, what we're looking for from the council in terms of direction is to find very specific solutions to each and every problem. No, that's not what we're looking for. Obviously, we need to do quite a bit more research in that regard. What we're looking for is a head nod and a commitment from the council that we should be concentrating our efforts on updating our revenue sources and amounts so that they're sustainable and keep up with our expenses. That does not mean that we will abandon our tried and true approach to expense reductions. So with that, Mayor, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I tried to actually, and this is not going to come as a shock, I tried to actually lay some of the groundwork for this conversation during the 2016 village report, pointing out that some of the things we've been able to accomplish for the last 6 years, I don't think that we expected to be able to do it as long as it was done. And the reality is, staff's done a terrific job under the leadership of this and prior councils, but I don't know if they have any more rabbits to pull out of their hat. I'm not even sure they have a hat to pull rabbits out of anymore. And when we have that, plus the continued boogeyman from Springfield with talk about permanent property tax freezes and taking all or a good chunk of the LGDF at the same time, accounting measures that go by the acronym of THEFT, then we have to worry about not just declining revenues and increasing expenses, but curveballs being thrown at us that are ones that even Chris Bryant couldn't hit. And we've been able to dodge that bullet now for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. It's just not going to continue. And I think there's going to be some unpalatable things that we in the community are going to have to deal with because if we don't deal with them in some mindful, measured way now, where they can be phased in over time or new initiatives can be undertaken that will bear fruit down the road, I think future councils are going to be stuck with some pretty harsh realities, and it's going to be a much more painful exercise. So end of speech. A couple of things that I have in mind is I do think we ought to look at not just whether there's a right fit for our revenues, and I'm not suggesting that we actually raise anything, but I think we do need to study it. And we've done this in the past where we'll look at sort of where we stand vis-a-vis other communities, and are there any appropriate adjustments that can be made given what we've done for the last 6 years and given how low the increase in expenses are every year. And I agree taking the public safety pension stuff out of here because that's a bigger issue that's beyond our ability other than eliminating the people involved. But I also think that, and I've said this before too, I think we need to start looking, and I think we're in a good position because staff and this and prior councils have put us in this position to start thinking more long-term about revenue. Because eventually, no matter what we do for sales tax in terms of enhancing it for the short term, when I say short term, I mean the next 10 years, maybe 15 years, there are major changes in lifestyle and the economy that are going to make those sources not what they are today and what they have been historically. So while we might be able to boost them up for the next 10 or 15 years, it's just going to be declining at a less rapid rate is what I'm getting at. So I think we need to start thinking now about, I hate the word alternative to become a bad word, but other revenue sources that will take into account that some of the ones we've come to rely upon are no longer going to be what they are. And again, I think this is something that we owe it to future councils to start talking about now to create options and to create awareness in the community and ultimately get community support about, well, what do you want to do about it? And then those decisions can be community driven, not reactionary and, oh my goodness, made in panic mode. Nobody wants to have to make the kinds of decisions that I know some of you in this room had to make in 08 and 09 when it was kind of forced upon you. You'd much rather make those decisions as part of a plan, like the comprehensive plan we've been discussing tonight. So some of what I'm talking about is aspirational. I'm saying that on purpose. It's not necessarily something we're going to do, but I think we need to have those plans. And if this, what would we do? And I do think the revenue base is something we need to look at, and not just adjusting what we currently have, but different revenues to what I predict will be replacing things that are going to be very, very different down the road. And again, it might be 10, 15 years from now, but I think now's the time to start talking about it. As uncomfortable as that might be. But a couple of things that I think, I do think we got to focus on, and this, that are not up there, and it's not just continuing to be efficient. And we're in the midst of a very successful consolidation by moving one of our major functions to a regional solution in DUCOM. That was an opportunity that presented itself, but we had a long-term goal last year of a major consolidation. DUCOM presented itself as one that I think made perfect sense to jump on, but I'd like to continue to focus or identify other potential consolidations.
For a minute, what dollar amount are we saving per year because of the DUCOM consolidation? In dollars and cents.
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there are...
Those savings is actually closer to a break even. The savings come throughout the county as the county regionalizes.
So with respect to our budget, there's not a significant reduction in our expense trend because of it?
That's correct.
Not immediately. Long term, yes.
Well, it sounds like the $100 million ACT initiative.
No, because also keep in mind that it meant a less of an investment in the police station facility.
No, I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
No, I wasn't suggesting that, but I think that's something that was probably going to happen at some point in time anyway. And I actually think we acted upon it at the appropriate, we acted on it at the appropriate time. But to your point, not only was that wasn't the major consolidation I had in mind when I was talking about it last year. That had presented itself as an opportunity that I think made sense to take advantage of for a whole host of reasons, but that wasn't the major consolidation I had in mind. This is why I'm bringing it up again. I would like to see a major consolidation identified, again, aspirationally. We may not do it. We may decide it's not what the community wants, but then fine, it's the community's decision. But let's identify another major consolidation opportunity, one that is aimed at achieving us more short-term savings, not through trying to squeeze more out of asking current people to do more and more with less and less until you have to do everything with nothing, but through a consolidation that can actually have a big short-term impact that is long-lasting. Related to that, and this topic comes up in different occasions periodically, but there's this trend in business right now, particularly with advancements in technology, to start identifying what are commoditized services and what are high-value services. And should we be looking at what are the high-value services that we provide and making those what we really offer the community, and identifying what are more commoditized services that perhaps could be done more effectively, more efficiently outside of the village? Some would call that outsourcing. I call it identifying the more low-value commoditized services that perhaps can be done more efficiently in a different way. I don't know. And instead we focus on the high-value, some would say core services. Don't jump out of your chair. High-value services that we are best suited to deliver to our residents. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I think with downtown management, utilizing the contracting, snow plowing, that just turned out to be something that was worked out better, as far as I've been told. And I don't know if that's necessarily a big savings, but I think we should look at where we might be able to do that. That's something we're seeing more of that happen in the private sector. I've got some other things I'd like to put on the long-range plan, but it has nothing to do with this topic. So if we're focusing on this topic today, I'll stop there.
Well, I think
Go.
what you said was very well put. This is a private business. We'd be looking at improving revenues, cutting costs, and improving service. But being a public entity, we are reluctant to increase revenue, but we must. We've done a lot of cost cutting, and then there's the option of adjusting services. As you say, if we outsource or combine services with other entities, I find that interesting. I don't want to start increasing, looking at revenues like the city of Chicago, where we're going to start charging for paper bags. I think that's silliness. I don't think that's what Downers Grove is all about. However, there probably are some things that other communities do that we could accept, especially if Springfield does its thing and starts raiding the Treasury to make it impossible. I'd like to have a better idea of what other communities are doing. How their status and how they're addressing the same things that we are. I think we're in better shape than most or many. So what are the other communities doing? How are they addressing those crossing lines? I have no specifics right now, but I think we need to put some revenue generators in our back pocket in case Springfield comes a-calling. Cutting costs, that's consolidations in that. And I don't know if I really want to adjust services, but maybe it's something we have to ask the residents. One of the things we might do I think one of the things we had last year, if I recall, was a survey. And I think maybe in this coming year we conduct a survey and start asking the tough questions.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you just reminded me of a very good idea that we've raised before. And because the stormwater calculator worked out so well, we had 6,000 people use that calculator as part of the referendum. To your point, rather than a survey, and I've brought this up before, I don't remember who offers that tool, but there's this tool that's out there where literally someone can take on a slider scale, any resident, looking at all the different fees and taxes they pay and services, and they can literally start to line it up. I want more of this, less of this, more of this, less of this, and then it tells them, okay, in order to get that, you'll have to pay more, or in order to pay less, you would have to cut these things back. And it's a very effective survey because for somebody just to sort of fill out a bunch of ovals on a survey, rate from 1 to 5, how much you like snow plowing and when you want your cul-de-sac done, it's kind of awkward and clunky. And I've seen this thing demonstrated at one of the National League of Cities. I wish I could remember the company that did it, but it was literally set up where, like the calculator, you would find out for you personally how it would affect your household. So my street gets plowed 12 hours later. but yet I don't have to pay more in taxes. I'm using one example. But I'm agreeing with you in saying that if we're going to do it, I would rather do something like that, that really boils it down to the individual so people see how it affects them. Because I think you get a different type of response than just a survey that says, do you want to pay more for snow plowing? And the answer is going to be no. But that's not really realistic. The slider scale, it makes it more of a personal, engaged type of experience. So I would agree with you and suggest that if it's not too expensive, that we do something like that.
And then lastly, we just had a bunch of demographics on population, increased income. Maybe if we could load some of that data into the crossing lines and see what the future really holds. But I will say that we as politicians, and we get away with not increasing property taxes because it's unpopular, and we've been doing so not for operations for several years, and I think the average person would have to admit, you just can't go on keeping things the same. And people need to know that there's not waste here. We're doing the best we can with what we have, but at some point we're going to have to go to a property tax trough, or we can't mess with income tax. But I mean, there's we're limited as to what we can do, and we'll probably have to bite the bullet. And it's a tough thing to say, tough thing to consider, but it's a possibility.
Conversely, if people decide that they want to be more aspirational in some of the things they want to do, that there's a cost that's associated with that, and that may be a choice too. But to really understand what that means, I think, is important.
Yep.
I'll jump in with some very brief comments. For purposes of this evening, I think the priority action item written up there is a very good first draft. I might want to tweak it before we get to actually putting it in the document. But as far as this evening is concerned, the priority action item, which is on the bottom right corner of the board to my left, that's unarguable that we have to do that. I do want to just take a couple minutes to make a few comments on my philosophy about consolidation. I start with the statement that an ounce of algebra is worth a pound of rhetoric, and that when we evaluate consolidations, show me the numbers in a spreadsheet verified. I don't want flowery rhetoric about how much money we'll save in the future. I want to see dollars and cents, how and why this saves money.
Yeah.
And then to riff on one of my favorite philosophers, good consolidations are good and we should do them. Bad consolidations are bad, we shouldn't do them. Telling which from which can be really tricky. So I strongly oppose the idea that all consolidations are necessarily good. And actually, I'll go a little farther. For example, there's some talk about the importance of creating consolidated school districts. But I've looked at the tax data, and here in Downers Grove, when we have the high school districts and the grade school districts separated, our total school taxes are rather significantly less than are paid, and I'm talking about tax rate per $1,000 assessed valuation, than the consolidated districts that are K through 12. So consolidating our primary schools and our high schools, that'll save money, but I don't think it does. So I think we need to be very careful from the idea that consolidation is a panacea. Show me the algebra, not the rhetoric, and I'll go along with it.
And just for the record, I agree with you completely. Not every consolidation makes sense, which is why I'm saying let's identify one that does make sense.
Absolutely.
If there aren't any, then so be it. But if we identify that one does make sense, then I think it's worthwhile. But just to do it for the sake of consolidation, absolutely not. That'd be silly.
That's really all I have for this evening, because this is just introduction to what's going to be a complicated topic.
Excuse me. I'll jump in. Mayor, I thought you had a lot of well-put and well-timed comments. That we really have been talking about the idea of, excuse me, we can't keep this up for a while now. It came up back during the budget discussion last fall, and I think probably
Year before that.
prior budget discussion the year before, exactly. We do have to look at options. Does that mean we're going to pull the trigger on one of them? No. but we do have to look at them. I think we also need the flip side. If there are, to borrow your phrase, commoditized services that we could look at adjusting or eliminating, whatever it ends up being, I think we need to know, what those are so that we can have a candid conversation with the community. We can take this step in terms of revenue, or we can take these steps in terms of service level reductions, and really engage everybody in order to figure out, what direction are we headed in here, and understand that you may reduce a service level at one point today, but you can't necessarily reduce it again tomorrow. So they're not necessarily long-term solutions to bending the cost curve.
And just to repeat Commissioner White's point another way, I also don't agree that every outsourcing idea makes sense.
Sure.
It has to actually work and make sense. Otherwise, it's just dumb. Marge, Bob? No obligation.
What the bill says.
The
What you
make,
said.
the make sense and the good are the tricks, right? That's where the real
Right.
magic is. We're only gonna do one that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the quantification.
There isn't anybody sitting around this table says, let's do consolidations that don't make sense. Nobody's gonna say that. So but that starts to speak to, I think, the service questions. And that's, I guess, as it relates to tonight's question about is that the right priority action item? I don't think it is, because it doesn't talk about the service end of it. And I guess I'm trying to differentiate from cutting or cost savings. That is in our DNA. 7 years worth of evidence that's in our DNA. It continues. But whether it's the way Martin expressed it with commodities versus real value-added services, or just services that we maybe just shouldn't do. I've not felt like we've had a very serious discussion about that. We identified, what was the number, Dave? 400 or something? Some ridiculous number of services that we provide. So you've got the 5 and 10 or 15 that we can all name right this second, and then there's 300 more things we're doing, we're employing people to do, and that's where this is people. So I'd like us to not avoid those serious studies, and they started studies before any decisions are made, because we have to understand what the algebra is behind it. But I think that's got to be part of it, because this, we look up there and we're looking at some pretty small numbers, but utility, we've talked about this for some time. I mean, we're taxing at a capped rate on a diminishing consumption item. So what's going to happen to utility taxes? Continuing that trend, that's why.
Bless you.
Income tax, use the word dodge the bullet, and to be sure we have, but I don't think anybody should realistically be thinking 15 years from now we should expect an increase in the amount of money the state of Illinois gives us from income taxes. Not likely. But we are going to have increases even if we just held the exact same service levels in the cost of providing the services. So the other thing I'd like us, which kind of leads me to the other thing I'd like us to find a way to think about and work through is, are there ways, this does speak to this existing or new revenue sources, are there ways to detach ourselves from some of the volatility? The state is one of the volatility elements, as is sales tax. Is there some way we can detach ourselves so we're less dependent, less reliant? Martin, you referred to 09, and that was like the opposite of fun. But it was thrust on us, and so that certainly could happen again. Anything we can do to detach ourselves from some of the volatility that's outside of our own control, I think is useful. And so that leads you to self-generated, call them fees, call them tax, whatever you want to call them, but they're sort of revenue. They're ways to develop revenue that we're levying on our own, either service provisions or
That's part of that.
activities.
Well, but,
That's that.
yes, although the difference is, something that we have complete control of versus something that Springfield can play with. And it goes back to the self-reliance point, regardless of what one thinks of the stormwater utility, good or bad or indifferent,
It's
it's
self-reliance.
completely within our control.
Right.
This community decides that question, not Springfield.
So I'd like us to keep that in our very near focus in terms of how we look at these, whether they're new or enhanced revenue sources. It should be kind of a priority in my mind that we prioritize those for both study and potential implementation that further detach us from some of that volatility.
I think that's going to be incorporated within, just
Sure.
as long as, yeah.
You were just reminding me something of Bob that I meant to bring up a while ago, and insulating us from volatility. What I didn't realize, and I'm not suggesting we go do some big study on it, because I want to come back to the figuring out where people are at through some kind of a calculator. But apparently there are insurance companies, and maybe Judy or a risk manager knows more about it than I do. There are insurance companies that actually sell policies in municipalities to deal with not just the kind of disasters that would happen, but actually major losses in sales tax, recessions. I forget how they end up calculating the risk, and yes, you have to pay the premium for the policy, but
Orange County tried that.
I'm sorry?
I think Orange County tried
No,
that.
well, actually, it's funny you say that because
After they went back?
No, I think that's what made them go bankrupt.
Yeah, we actually looked at this back in 2009 as one of the
it's actually
strategies.
a California company that sells the policy.
So we have some notes on that we could update as well.
And I, again, have no idea whether that makes any sense whatsoever, but I just don't know. And it could be, it's the dumbest idea on the planet, but then fine. But I only mentioned it because you commented on, is there something that would help detach us from that volatility? I don't know if there are products in the marketplace that do that on a cost-effective basis. I have no clue.
You know, we're spending this time in comprehensive plan, which we certainly should. I mean, that's good stewardship. And we do long-range planning. But in both of those, inherent in both of those, right, is a real need to reduce volatility. Because we're talking about things we might want to do 5 years, 10 years from now, and trying to implement policies and ordinances that get you to a point that is not tomorrow, it's not 2018, it's 2028 or 2031. We've got to put some work into trying to help avoid that volatility if we think we're going to be able to really kind of follow through on the stuff we're doing from a planning standpoint.
If we were able to get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 people to actually participate in this kind of slider scale thing that I'm talking about, and the only reason I'm encouraged that we might be able to do that is because 6,000 people actually participated in the stormwater utility calculator. I think it would provide a lot of information, provide that survey information, but it would also give us some ideas where people would be willing to do with less in order to avoid paying more, but also it would give us the converse. Where do folks see they would like to have more services, whether it's a sidewalk on every side of the street or it's stormwater, curb and gutter, or whatever it is. But in the context of some idea of what that cost is. And I don't know how much work goes into developing this. My guess is probably a lot. Because if you don't give a realistic answer to the cost, you lose some of the exercise.
Yeah, my immediate reaction to that is that if it worked, it would be totally and unbelievably awesome. Okay, so as a consequence, but as far as a practical matter,
I saw it demonstrated, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't just a
as a
snake
practical
oil.
matter for this community, if someone shows me a community where they're doing it, and I can look at it and see how it worked in that community, then I'd be willing to, but I don't want us creating that out of whole cloth.
No.
That'd be far beyond
No, this is
their expertise and our bandwidth.
No, this is a vendor that was providing this, where they work with you and they set it up. Bill, I have no idea what the investment is. I have no idea. But at least as demonstrated, it looked like it would really be cool.
If there's towns doing it, I'd gladly spend a lot of time
Well,
studying how
I'll
that
be
worked
happy
in
to
those
go
towns.
figure some of that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
The real challenge in the slider scales is the engagement level of the community and the precision with which those models are crafted. The ones we've seen are nowhere near the precision and engagement level of our
That's my
community.
fear.
That they handle it at a department level, and we're talking about doing it at a service level. And so the concept is absolutely fantastic. There's been a couple of towns in Texas, some in California that we've seen. We would gladly look into it and see if it makes sense. There's some challenges there. One of the things that was great about the stormwater calculator was its absolute precision.
Well, that was one thing.
It was one service out of 300, and everybody in that team, from Karen to Janice and Judy and Megan, and everybody there was just tons of time put into that on a system we had built over 5 years.
Right.
And
So-
also was-
See what happens? You do a really good job at something, we want you to do more.
That
Also, you go to the moon, now it's Mars.
Yeah.
That stormwater calculator also had one really big difference in that it was a sort of an either-or
Mhm.
question, a very, very, very narrow scope of opportunity.
Yeah.
And whereas, I don't mean to discount it, Mayor, I've never seen it, but some of the thoughts that come to mind is you've got things like overhead burden that aren't necessarily
Mhm.
tied to the one slider you're moving in a moment.
That's why most of them set them up by departments, because
Yeah,
it's
so,
easy to do it that way.
you know,
Yeah, I suspect the setup has a great deal of, but I don't know.
So we can look into what I'm hearing. One of the things tonight, I hope I don't jump in front of where the mayor usually wraps up here, but in addition to this, I'm hearing also the idea of adding to this priority action item a look at service, that whole service level question, and trying to approximate, it costs this to get this, it costs this to get this, and go down that path as a priority action item for this.
There might be a parallel one, actually.
I think it has to be, actually, the way it ends up working out, sort of how the stormwater utility discussion was.
Right. I think that's important, because anytime anyone has this conversation about increasing revenue, the first thing that anyone will say in response is, well, what, have you cut everything you should have cut before talking to me about more revenue? And if we can't answer that question, I think we got a really good start, because we got really good history of being very efficient, but then the next question is the one that has been raised in a couple different ways. Well, all right, fine, is there something that we could do without?
Exactly.
I don't know. I mean, that's a community conversation.
The Downers Grove sweepstakes.
You know,
Be
the
careful what you ask for, we're gonna get that
The
question.
Legions are making big bucks with bingo. Maybe we're just kind of looking for some other revenue
You
sources.
guys can talk about video gaming when I'm gone, all right?
Just saying.
Tag- tag
Tuesday
others.
night council meeting / bingo.
I will look for that under new business next week. Anything else to?
I'm good.
It's good direction.
At this point, obviously, Commissioner Wallace will weigh in as well. Anything more you need from us tonight?
Oh, this is great direction. Thank you, Mayor.
Great, very good. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to
Public
adjourn?
comment?
Oh, public comment.
Oh, yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah, we got public.
Sorry. Our public members of the audience tripled in size without my even noticing.
Public comments
And they're
from my manager.
stunned.
So what services can we cut, Rich?
No comment.
Well said.
Dave, is that between 14 to 15 and 15 to 16? Is some of that, you mentioned earlier that the state changed the income tax and also the sales. So is that number could be skewed by those items, right? So is it, I mean, it
Yes.
is what it is, but is it really that big of an increase and that big of a decrease?
One of the one-time adjustments in sales tax, one of our taxpayers overpaid for 7 years. And then in 2016, it was adjusted all in 1 year. So very small, that's a
Should be
very
one
insightful
decision
comment
on that.
and question there, Todd. Yeah, but that's exactly what happened. It doesn't account for a lot of it in any given year, tiny amounts of over 6 or 7 years. We're still looking into the other one-time adjustment that we just became aware of in the last 60 days.
And what type of items are in that other one, that bottom one?
Oh, the $5 million of other, that's every single other revenue source in the general
Okay.
fund.
And
Just
then the
so,
last thing is, you know, Mayor, you said, can we be more efficient somewhere? Do we know in Public Works how much it costs for them to put in 25, or a foot of culvert?
Mhm.
Or asphalt? I mean, I don't know that we have that, because I did a FOIA request one time, it was, well, we don't have that information because we bought, 20 yards of gravel. and we just take what we need. So are we there now with that?
Yeah, all those services that are contracted out are on a unit price basis.
But this is stuff the village does.
Yeah, we have a real good handle, well, you don't have a particular record, our engineers could tell you unit pricing, activity-based costing, those kind of things, we have a real good handle on. I don't know if we have a writing them down and tracking them that officially, but we have a real good handle on those types of things.
For the work that the village is doing itself
Yes.
with its village employees.
Yeah. And there's a lot of services that we don't have a real good handle on it for all the reasons that Commissioner Barnett. So we have a great track record of tracking at department and sub-department levels, but there are activities that we have not isolated down to and allocated overhead to and all those types of things. The big ones for sure, especially on the public works side.
Yes, sir.
I changed my-
Thank you, Todd.
I changed my mind.
That's it.
You want us to eliminate all the boards and commissions? What?
Yeah, let's start that tonight. Two things come to mind. The first thing is, I'm not sure if the residents really appreciate that 72% of their real estate tax bill goes towards schools. I think it's incumbent upon this body to keep reminding people of that. Secondly, there was that delightful meeting at South, the intergovernmental meeting, and I don't know if it's actually gone beyond, are there things that could be combined? And I'm not sure what those might be. Maybe it's computer services or what have you, but I'd like to see the various units of government, particularly with the village responsibility being 8.9% of the total cut. What are the 90% doing the 91% to work cooperatively and to get rid of kind of the fiefdoms and the territorial issues? So there would be a real impact. People are upset with property taxes generally, but also I don't know if we do a great job on making the point that the tax rates in Downers Grove are lower than surrounding communities. If you took a like house here compared to Naperville and looked at that tax bill, the overall value of the home might be less because they're farther out, but the tax bite is significantly more.
So I think out of 34 communities in DuPage County, we're the fifth lowest.
Yes.
Although the schools have the most to do with that.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. Number one, Naperville actually did us a big favor because when Mayor Chirico was running around this list of the lowest property taxes in the area, on their list, Naperville was, of course, the lowest, but you knew who was next lowest? It was Downers Grove. So I was like, thank you, Mayor Chirico, just send that around as much as you possibly can. And the other thing is, I'm glad you mentioned collaboration, because I said consolidation, but oftentimes you can achieve just as many savings if it makes sense through collaboration, not necessarily consolidation. So I included that in my other collaboration opportunities. Yes, you know the 3 C's. Cooperation, collaboration, and consolidation. Anything else? Any other public comment? Well, this conversation will continue as well. We're not going to resolve anything tonight. So stay tuned. Thank you for your input. Appreciate you following us into the room. Anything else from those at the table? Now I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Good night.